On an early autumn morning of 2017, in a middle-class suburb on the outskirts of Atlanta, Chris Yanchevsky stood alone at the door of one of the houses. He was not a guest in this house. Moments earlier, armed agents of the Internal Security Service, dressed in bulletproof vests, took up positions around a neat two-story brick house and knocked on the front door. And when the head of the family who lived there opened it, the agents broke in. Yanchevsky, the criminal investigator of the tax service, quietly followed them. Now he found himself in the hallway, in the center of a flurry of activity, watching as agents searched the premises and seized electronic devices. They divided the family, placing the father, the assistant director of the local high school, and part-time object of their investigation in one room. His wife was taken to another room, 2 children to the third. The agent turned on the TV and put on the Mickey Mouse Club cartoons to distract the children from the intrusion of strangers into their house. Yanchevsky participated in this raid only as an observer, a guest flown in from Washington, D.C. to watch and advise the local Internal Security Service while its agents carry out their orders. But it was Yanchevsky's investigation that led the agents here, to this very ordinary house with a well-kept yard, located among other ordinary houses that can be found anywhere in America. He led them there based on a strange, incipient form of evidence. Yanchevsky followed the links of the Bitcoin blockchain, building this chain until it connected this very ordinary house with an unusually violent place on the internet, and then connected this place with hundreds of other men around the world. All of these men were involved in one of the most high-profile and severe cybercrimes. Now they were all on Yanchevsky's long list of targets. Over the past few years of service, Yanchevsky, his partner Tigran Gambarian, and a small group of investigators from a growing list of 3-letter American agencies have used a new investigative technique. They were tracking a cryptocurrency that once seemed impossible to track in order to start solving one criminal case after another. The volume of criminal cases has reached an unprecedented epic scale. However, new investigative techniques had never before led them to a case like this, in which the fates of so many people, both victims and perpetrators, seem to depend on the results of this new form of forensic examination. The morning searches in the Atlanta suburbs were the first stage of the traditional investigation of Yanchevsky. This was, as he later put it, proof of the feasibility of the concept. A proof of concept is a demonstration of the practical feasibility of a method, idea, technology, feasibility, in order to prove the fact that the method, idea, or technology works. From where Yanchevsky stood in front of the house, he could hear the national security agents talking to the father of the family, who answered over a cracked, humble voice. In another room, he heard agents interrogating the man's wife. She replied that yes, she found certain images on her husband's computer. But he told her that he downloaded them accidentally when he was downloading unlicensed music. And in the third room, 2 school-age children, kids about the same age as the Yanchevsky children, could be heard watching TV. They asked for a snack, apparently oblivious to the tragedy unfolding in their family. Yanchevsky remembers the seriousness of the moment. Their suspect was a high school administrator, husband and father of 2 children. Whether he was guilty or not, but the accusations that a group of law enforcement agents were making against him, their mere presence in his house, would almost certainly have ruined his life. Yanchevsky thought again about the method of investigation that had brought them to this place. It was like a digital vine, exposing the hidden layer of illicit connections underlying the visible world. He hoped that facts and evidence would not be able to lead him astray. On a summer day in London, a few months earlier, a British-born tech entrepreneur named Jonathan Levine walked into the unassuming brick headquarters of the British National Crime Agency. The National Crime Agency is the British equivalent of the FBI, located on the south bank of the Thames. A friendly agent led him to the second floor of the building and through the office kitchen, offering him a cup of tea. Levin agreed, as he always did when visiting Nancy, and according to tradition, did not take the tea bag out of the cup. Two men were sitting with cups in their hands at the agent's desk in a group of booths. Levin was here as part of a routine visit to a client, to find out how the agent and his colleagues were using software created by the company Levin co-founded. This company, Chainalysis, was the first technology firm in the world to focus exclusively on a task that a few years ago might have seemed like an oxymoron: tracking cryptocurrencies. Inc. was one of dozens of law enforcement agencies around the world that learned how to use the Chainalysis software to turn the most preferred means of trade in the digital underworld environment into its Achilles heel. To begin with, let's dive a little into the theory of blockchain. When Bitcoin first entered the world market in 2000, one of the fundamental promises of the cryptocurrency was absolute anonymity. The cryptocurrency allegedly revealed only which coins are on which Bitcoin addresses. The addresses were long, unique strings of letters and numbers, without any identifying information about the owners of these coins. This layer of obfuscation gave many of its early supporters the impression that Bitcoin could be a completely anonymous internet currency that libertarian cypherpunks and crypto-anarchists have been waiting for so long. A new financial world where digital portfolios full of unmarked banknotes can instantly change hands around the world. Satoshi Nakamoto, the mysterious creator of Bitcoin, went so far as to write in one of the first emails describing the cryptocurrency that participants can remain anonymous. On Friday, October 31, 2008, he also wrote in an email, "I am working on a new electronic money system, completely peer-to-peer, with no trusted third party." And thousands of users of the black markets of the dark web, such as Sil Mol, used Bitcoin as their central payment mechanism. But the paradoxical truth about Bitcoin, on which Chainalysis built her business, was as follows. Each Bitcoin payment is fixed in its blockchain, with an unchangeable and completely public record of every transaction in the Bitcoin network. The blockchain ensures that the coin cannot be forged or spent more than once. However, this is achieved due to the fact that all participants in the Bitcoin economy witness every transaction. Every criminal payment, in a sense, was in full view of absolutely everyone. A few years after the advent of Bitcoin, academic security researchers, and then companies such as Chainalysis, began to look for gaping holes in the masks separating the addresses of Bitcoin users and their real identities. They could follow the Bitcoins in the blockchain, moving from address to address, until they found one that could be associated with a famous person. In some cases, an investigator can find out Bitcoin addresses by making a transaction with them, just as an undercover drug enforcement agent can conduct a control purchase. In other cases, an investigator can trace coins to an account on a cryptocurrency exchange, where financial regulations require users to verify their identity. A quick subpoena about the exchange from one of Chainalysis' clients in law enforcement was enough to dispel any illusion of Bitcoin's anonymity. Chainalysis combined these methods of de-anonymizing Bitcoin users with methods that allowed it to cluster addresses, showing that tens to millions of addresses sometimes belonged to one person or organization. For example, when coins from two or more addresses were spent in one transaction, it turned out that whoever created this multi-way transaction should have control over both sender addresses, which allows the chain to combine them into one transaction. In other cases, the Chainalysis and its users can explore the P-chain. P-chain is a method of laundering large amounts of cryptocurrency through a series of numerous transactions. Stolen funds, as a rule, are distributed by attackers to two separate addresses, each time taking away a small amount. During the subsequent transfer, this process is repeated over and over again until it reaches its destination. Thanks to such tricks, Bitcoin turned out to be almost the opposite of what it was positioned earlier. A kind of bait for crypto criminals who have been conscientiously and indelibly recording evidence of their dirty transactions for years. By the 2017 year, agencies such as the FBI, the Drug Enforcement Administration, and the Criminal Investigation Division of the U.S. Internal Revenue Service were tracking Bitcoin transactions to conduct one successful investigation after another. Very often with the assistance of chainlesses. Things started small and then gained a frenzied scope. Investigators tracked the operations of two corrupt federal agents to show that before the closure of the forces of CRUT, the largest market in the Darknet, in the 2013 year, one stole bitcoins from this dark network market, and the other sold law enforcement data to the creator of this market, Ross Ulbricht. Then they tracked down $500 million worth of bitcoins stolen from the Mount Online exchange, Jock, and showed that the proceeds were laundered by the Russian administrator of another crypto exchange BTC. Servers that were discovered in New Jersey. And finally, they followed in the footsteps of bitcoins to establish the identity of the founder of another black market Alpha Bay, which was 10 times larger than the mole forces. In fact, while Levin was sitting in London and talking with Agent Ince and having a cup of tea, a coalition of half a dozen law enforcement agencies was gathering in Bangkok to arrest the creator of Alpha Bay, Alexander Kazas. His story deserves special coverage because a few days after his arrest, he unexpectedly commits suicide in his own cell. But we'll talk about this next time. Levin, as always, was looking forward to the next major investigation of Chainalysis after running through several open cases with him. Agent Ince mentioned a sinister site on the Darknet that had recently come to the attention of the agency. It was called Welcome to Video. Welcome to the video. Jonathan Levine was stunned by what he saw. A whole network of criminal payments, which were supposed to be kept secret, opened up before him. The Enca stumbled upon this site in the midst of investigating a terrible case involving a criminal named Matthew Falder. A scientist from Manchester, England, Falder posed as an artist and begged nude photos from strangers on the internet. And then he threatened to share these images with the victim's family or friends, if they did not take increasingly humiliating and depraved photos for him. Ultimately, he forced his victims to commit self-mutilation and even rape others on camera. At the time of his arrest, there were more than 50 people on the list of his victims, at least 3 of whom tried to commit suicide. On Falder's computers, Ince discovered that he was a registered user on the Welcome to Video website, a criminal enterprise that eclipsed even Falder's atrocity in its scale. This evidence base then moved from the Child Exploitation Investigation Group to the Computer Crimes Group, including the agent dealing with cryptocurrencies, at whose table Levin was now sitting. Welcome, that video seemed to be one of those rare sites that sold access to clips of child sexual abuse in exchange for bitcoins. It was clear at a glance that his library of images and videos was unusually large, and I turned to her and often added completely new materials. Huge user base all over the world. Sometimes known as child pornography, the class of images that were distributed on high-quality videos have increasingly been referred to as child sexual abuse materials to dispel any doubts that they are related to acts of child abuse. Child sexual abuse material, as it is usually abbreviated CM. For many years, it has been a huge hidden darknet stream, a collection of thousands of websites protected by anonymous software such as Tor. These anonymity tools, used by millions of people around the world seeking to avoid online surveillance, also began to serve as a shadow infrastructure for a disgusting network of abuses, which very often hindered attempts by law enforcement agencies to identify visitors or site administrators with CM. The Enka agent showed Levin a Bitcoin address, which, as the agency determined, was part of the Wellcome video financial network. Levin suggested uploading it to the Chainless's cryptographic tracking software tool, known as Reactor. He put down a cup of tea, pulled up a chair to the agent's laptop, and began to draw up a diagram of a set of addresses of sites in the Bitcoin blockchain representing wallets, to which the Welcome to Video platform received payments from thousands of customers. Levin was stunned by what he saw. Many of the users of this child abuse website, and, apparently, its administrators have done almost nothing to hide the traces of their wallets. A whole network of criminal payments that were supposed to be kept secret was revealed to him. Over the years, Levin has observed how some Darknet operators have mastered some tricks to avoid tracking. They pushed their money through numerous intermediary addresses or mixer services designed to confuse investigators. Or they used a cryptocurrency in a manner focused on maximum confidentiality of transactions. But looking at the Welcome to Video cluster in the Enka office that day, Levin immediately realized that his users were much more naive. Many simply bought bitcoins on cryptocurrency exchanges and then sent them directly from their wallets via video. The contents of the website's wallets, in turn, were processed on just 3 exchanges: Bithamp and Koenwang in South Korea, and Huobi in China, where they were converted back into traditional currency. Someone seemed to be constantly using large transactions with multiple inputs to withdraw funds from the site and then cash them out. This simplified the Reactor's work on instant and automatic clustering of thousands of addresses, determining that they all belonged to one service, which Jonathan Levin could now mark in the software as a Welcome Video. Moreover, Levin could see that the constellation of exchanges surrounding this cluster and connected to it contained the data necessary to identify a wide range of anonymous users of the site. Not only those who cashed bitcoins from the site, but also those who bought bitcoins in order to pay for the services provided on this site with them. The blockchain connection between Welcome Video and his clients was one of the most obviously incriminating connections Levin had ever witnessed. These consumers of child sexual abuse seem to be completely unprepared for the current state of financial forensics in blockchain. If we take as an analogy the cat-and-mouse game that Levin had been playing for years, the Welcome of that video looked like an unlucky rodent that had never encountered a predator before. As he sat in front of the ENS agent's laptop, it dawned on Levin, perhaps more clearly than ever before, that he was living in the golden age of cryptocurrency tracking. That blockchain researchers in the likes of Chainless's were significantly ahead of those they were targeting. After seeing that someone was cashing out most of the Welcome to Video revenue through 2 exchanges in South Korea, Levin had already guessed that the site administrator was most likely located in that country. It seems that many users of the site paid the site directly from addresses where they purchased coins on exchanges such as Coinbase and Sekolah, based in the United States. To eliminate this global network of child abuse, it may only require the involvement of another law enforcement agency in the United States or Korea, which may require identification data from these exchanges. And Levin knew where to turn. "I have people who might be interested in this," he told his guide from the Enka. But at first, when Levin was about to leave, he silently memorized the first 5 characters of the Welcome to Video address that the agent showed him. The Chain Reactor software included a feature that could automatically populate Bitcoin addresses based on their first few unique digits or letters. 5 characters will be enough. This is a short password that can unlock a live map of a global criminal conspiracy. It was already evening in Thailand when Levin spoke with Chris Yanchevsky and Tigran Gambarian. That night, at the beginning of July 2017, 2 special agents of the US Internal Revenue Service for criminal investigations. We were sitting at Bangkok's Suvarnabhumi airport worried about the disappointment caused by the fact that they were in the country. The largest destruction of the Darknet market in history. By the 2017 year of the IRS, the US Tax Administration became the owner of one of the most skillful cryptocurrency trackers in the US government. It was Gambarian who tracked the bitcoins of two corrupt agents in the investigations of the mole forces, and then solved the case of money laundering of BTCI. Working with Levin, Gambarian even tracked the Alpha Bay server, finding it in a data center in Lithuania. Nevertheless, when Gambarian and Yanchevsky arrived in Bangkok to arrest the Alpha Bay administrator, French-Canadian Alexander Kazis, they were largely excluded from the inner circle of agents of the Drug Enforcement Administration and the FBI who led the operation. They were not invited to the place of Kaz's arrest or even to the office, where other agents and prosecutors watched a live broadcast of the detention. For Gambarian and Yanchevsky, the story was completely typical. Agents of the Criminal Crimes and Taxes Division in the US Department of State were engaged in detective work, carried weapons and made arrests, as were their colleagues from the FBI and the Drug Enforcement Administration. But because of the URSS's tasteless image, they often found that the agents' colleagues treated them like accountants. "Just don't give us an audit," their colleagues from other law enforcement agencies joked when they were represented at meetings. While in Bangkok, Gambarian and Yanchevsky spent most of their time idly thinking about what their next case should be. Looking through the reactor software to track the chain of chainless blocks to brainstorm. Darknet markets like Alpha Bay seem to have been reduced to rubble thanks to an operation in Thailand, and it will take months or even years for them to gain momentum again. After all, the markets in the Darknet are turning over billions of dollars, and no one was going to give up such a profitable business. Agents were considering taking over a gambling site on the Darknet, but illegal online casinos were hardly worth their attention. On the day of departure from Thailand, Gambarian Yanchevsky arrived at the airport, only to discover that their flight to Washington was severely delayed. Stuck in the terminal for several hours, they sat half asleep and bored, literally staring at the wall. To pass the time, Gambarian decided to try calling Levin from Chainalysis to discuss the following cases. When Levin picked up the phone, it turned out that he had news. He was looking for a website that didn't fit in with the URSS's usual goals, but hoped that agents would want to check it out. This site was the welcome of that video. Cases of sexual exploitation of children have traditionally been the focus of investigations by the FBI and the Internal Security Service, but not by the tax administration. This was partly due to the fact that images and videos of child sexual abuse most often spread without the use of money changing hands, which investigators called a baseball card trading system, which took them outside the scope of the URSS. But the Velcom video was different from them. This site had a money trail, and this color turned out to be very clear. Shortly after returning to DC, Gambarian and Yanchevsky hired a technical analyst named Aaron Bice from the contract technology firm Excigen, with whom they researched the BTC cryptocurrency exchange. Together, they sketched out a utility Velcom video for working in the reactor, and they saw what Levin understood instantly: how vividly this site represented the goal. His entire financial anatomy was revealed to them. Thousands of grouped Bitcoin addresses, many of which were with barely hidden payments and payouts on exchanges, that they knew could be used to identify information. Soon Yanchevsky handed over the case to federal prosecutor Zia Faruqi, who immediately succumbed to the idea of taking up the video, and officially launched an investigation. Gambarian, Yanchevsky, Bay and Faruqi made up an unusual team that focused on exposing a large-scale network of child exploitation. Yanchevsky was a tall, square-jawed agent from the Midwest. He was a symbiosis of Edward Norton and Chris Evans. He wore horn-rimmed glasses when he looked at the computer screen. He was recruited into the DC computer crimes team from the AC office in Indiana. After proving his bravery in the fight against terrorism, drug trafficking, government corruption, and tax evasion cases. Bice was an expert in data analysis and, according to Yanchevsky, worked like a machine. Faruqi was an experienced assistant U.S. attorney with extensive experience in prosecuting national security threats and money laundering cases. He had an almost manic concentration and intensity. He spoke comically fast and, as it seemed to his colleagues, hardly slept. And Gambarian was also in the team, an agent with tousled hair and a neatly trimmed beard who by the year 2017 made a name for himself as a specialist in the Ars cryptocurrency and a specialist in the Darknet. Faruqi called him Bitcoin Jesus. The team began to realize that no matter how simple it seemed, it was actually staggering in its complexity. At the same time, none of them had ever dealt with cases of sexual exploitation of children before. They had no experience with images and videos of child abuse, the mere possession of which by ordinary Americans was already a criminal offense. They've never even seen this kind of material. And they had no emotional or psychological preparation for the graphic nature of what they had to face. Nevertheless, when two agents showed Faruqi what they saw in the blockchain, the prosecutor was not confused by their collective inexperience in the field of child exploitation. As a lawyer specializing in money laundering cases, he saw no reason why, having evidence of criminal payments, Yanchevsky Gambarian handed over to him. They couldn't treat that video as, in fact, a financial investigation. When Yanchevsky and Gambarian first copied a bulky web address containing incoherent letters and numbers into their Tor browsers, they were greeted by an unremarkable website with the words "Welcome to video," "Welcome to the video," and an invitation to log in. Yanchevsky compared the minimalism of the initial page of this site with the Google Start page. Each of the team members registered their own username and password and logged in. Behind the first welcome page, the site displayed an extensive, seemingly endless collection of video titles and their icons, arranged in squares of 4 frames, apparently automatically typed from the frames of each file. These little images were a catalogue of horrors. Scene after scene, they demonstrated the sexual abuse of children. The agents mentally tuned in to see these images, but they still weren't ready for reality. Yanchevsky remembers the shock he experienced when he saw only the thumbnails of the video, and how his brain almost refused to perceive what was happening on the screen. He discovered that the site has a search page written with errors instead of a video section. Popular keywords entered by users were listed under the search field. The most popular query was 1-year-old. The second most popular request was a 2-year-old. Yanchevsky at first thought that he must have misunderstood something. He expected to see recordings of sexual abuse of teenagers, or perhaps children, but of middle age. However, scrolling through the page, he discovered with increasing disgust and indignation that the site was overflowing with videos of abuse of toddlers and even babies. Is that true? It can't be. Yanchevsky spoke, petrified, talking about his reaction when he first viewed the site. Are there really so many videos here? No, it can't be true. Both agents understood that one day they would really have to watch at least some of the videos offered. But, fortunately, when they first visited the site, they were unable to access them. To do this, they had to transfer bitcoins to the address that the site provided to each registered user. For bitcoins, they could purchase tokens, which could then be exchanged for downloads. And since they weren't undercover agents, they didn't have permission to buy these tokens. Yes, they did not really strive for this. There was a copyright date at the bottom of several pages of the site. The 13th of March, 2000 of the 15th year, that is, the Welcome to Video website was launched more than 2 years ago. Even at first glance, it was clear that it had turned into one of the largest repositories of child sexual abuse videos that law enforcement agencies had ever encountered. You can't stop child rape just by trying to shut down a server in South Korea. Simply disabling the site was not their first priority. When Yanchevsky and Gambarian analyzed the mechanics of the site, they saw that users could receive tokens not only by paying for them, but also by uploading their own videos. The more of these videos were subsequently downloaded by other users, the more tokens the person who uploaded it earned. "Don't download adult porn," the download page said. The last two words were highlighted in red for greater expressiveness. The page also warned that uploaded videos would be checked for uniqueness. Only new materials will be accepted, a feature that agents believe was specifically designed to encourage more downloads of such videos. Gambarian has been hunting criminals of all stripes for many years, from small-time scammers to corrupt colleagues from federal law enforcement agencies and cybercriminals. Usually, he felt that he could understand their intentions in general terms. Sometimes he even sympathized with them. "I've known drug dealers who were probably more decent people than some white-collar tax evaders," he mused. "I could be connected to some of these criminals. Their motivation is simple greed." But now he found himself in a world where people committed atrocities, the nature of which he did not understand, but were motionless by motives that were completely unknown to him. After a childhood in war-torn Armenia and post-Soviet Russia, as well as a career associated with the criminal world, he considered himself familiar with the worst manifestations of what people are capable of. Now he felt that he had been naive. His first look at the Welcome to video exposed and destroyed the hidden remnant of his idealism towards humanity. "It killed me a little bit," says Gambarian. As soon as they saw firsthand what the Welcome video really was, Gambarian and Yanchevsky realized that the case required urgency beyond their usual investigation in the Darknet environment. Every day spent online by the site led to even more child abuse. Gambarian and Yanchevsky knew that their evidence was still in the blockchain. It is important to note that the site did not seem to have a mechanism by which customers could withdraw money from their accounts. The site only had an address where they could pay for tokens. There wasn't even a moderator to ask for a refund. This meant that all the money they could see leaking from the site, bitcoins worth more than $300,000. At the time of the transactions, almost certainly belonged to the site administrators. Gambarian started contacting his acquaintances in the Bitcoin community, looking for employees on exchanges who might know the heads of two Korean exchanges, Bithamp and Coin1, on which most of the money was cashed out, with Welcome to Video, as well as one American exchange, which received a small part of all funds. He found that the mere mention of child abuse evaporated the usual resistance of the cryptocurrency industry to government intervention. Even before he sent an official legal request or a subpoena, the employees of all three exchanges were ready to help. They promised, as soon as they could, to provide him with the account details for the addresses that he pulled out of the reactor. Meanwhile, Gambarian continued to explore the Welcome to Video website itself. After registering an account on the site, he decided to try some basic verification of its security. He right-clicked on the page and selected View Page Source Code in the menu that appeared. This would give him a chance to look at the raw HTML code of the site before the Tor browser converted it into a graphical web page. In any case, looking at a block of code is much better than looking at an endless tangle of pathetic human depravity. Almost instantly, he noticed what he was looking for: an IP address. IP address. This is a unique digital address of a computer on the network. To Gambarian's surprise, each miniature image on the site displayed in the HTML code of the site the IP address of the server on which it was physically hosted: 121, 185, 153, 64. He copied these 11 digits into the command line of his computer and launched the basic trace road utility, following the path through the internet back to the location of the original server. To his surprise, the results showed that this computer was not closed at all by the anonymous Tor network. Gambarian was looking at the real unprotected address of the Welcome to Video server. Confirming Levin's initial guess, the site was hosted on a home connection of an internet provider in South Korea outside of Seoul. The Welcome to Video administrator seems to have made a typical rookie mistake. The site itself was hosted in the Tor, but the thumbnails of the images it collected on its homepage turned out to be taken from the same computer outside of routing the connection through the Tor. Perhaps in an erroneous attempt to speed up page loading, Gambarian could not restrain himself. Sitting in front of his computer screen in his office in the District of Columbia, looking at the discovered location of the website administrator, whose arrest, he felt, was approaching, the agent burst out laughing. Yanchevsky was at the firing range in Maryland, waiting for his turn to shoot, when he received an email from the American cryptocurrency exchange, which his team subpoenaed. It contained identifying information about the suspected administrator of the video, who cashed in earnings from the site there. The attachments to the email showed a middle-aged Korean with an address outside of Seoul, which exactly confirms the IP address that Gambarian found. The documents even included a photo of a man holding his ID card, apparently to confirm his identity when registering on the American Stock Exchange. For a moment, Yanchevsky thought he was looking at the Welcome to Video administrator face to face. But he understood that everything was not so simple here. The man in the photo had noticeably dirty hands, with dirt stuck under his nails. He looked more like an agricultural worker than a computer genius who administers one of the nastiest sites on the Darknet. Over the next few days, while other exchanges responded to the subpoenas, a response began to emerge. One Korean exchange, and then another, sent Gambarian documents about the men who controlled the addresses of the Welcome video caching. They named not only this middle-aged man, but also a much younger, 21-year-old man, named Song Jong-woo. Both indicated the same address and the same surname. Were they father and son? The agents believed that they were approaching the site administrators, but they came to understand that simply closing the site or arresting its administrators was unlikely to serve the interests of justice. The constellation of Bitcoin addresses that Welcome to Video has generated on the blockchain represents an extensive, lively connection between both consumers and, more importantly, producers of materials about child sexual abuse. By this point, prosecutor Zeph Ruki had enlisted the help of a team of other prosecutors, including Lindsay Sattenberg, an assistant U.S. attorney specializing in child exploitation cases. She noted that even disabling the site doesn't have to be their first priority. You cannot allow a child to be raped while you are trying to disable a server in South Korea, Faruqi summed up her conclusions. The team began to realize that no matter how simple this case seemed at first, after simply identifying the site administrators, it was actually staggering in its complexity. They will need to trace the money not only to one or two web administrators in Korea, but also from this central point to hundreds of potential suspects, both active attackers and their accomplices around the world. Gambarian's discovery of the site's IP address and quick cooperation with cryptocurrency exchanges turned out to be a success. However, the real work was still ahead. Just 2 weeks after Levin handed over his tip, a team of agents from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division and prosecutors. She knew almost exactly where the Welcome to Video website was located, but they also knew that they would need help to move on. They had no ties to the Korean National Police Agency, nor the resources to arrest perhaps hundreds of users of the site. And this operation would require much more personnel than the tax administration could collect. Faruqi suggested that the Internal Security Service be involved in this case, in partnership with a certain local office in Colorado Springs. He chose this agency and its remote outpost because of a particular agent he had worked with in the past, an investigator named Thomas Tempsey. A year earlier, Faruqi and Tempsey had solved a North Korean arms trade case together, the purpose of which was to smuggle weapons components through South Korea and China. During this investigation, they flew to Seoul to meet with the Korean National Police. After the successful work, American and Korean colleagues drank together in a bar and sang karaoke. In a particularly memorable moment of the night, Korean agents poked fun at the American team for their alleged diet of hot dogs and hamburgers. One agent mentioned sanakshi, a kind of small octopus that some Koreans eat not just raw, but alive and wriggling. Tamsi courageously replied that he would try this dish. A few minutes later, a couple of Korean agents brought a fist-sized live octopus wrapped around a chopstick to the table. Tamsi put the writhing cephalopod in his mouth hole. He chewed and swallowed, even as his tentacles wriggled between his lips and black ink dripped from his face onto the table. It was just awful, Tamsi recalls. Koreans found it funny. Tamsi acquired an almost legendary status in certain circles of the Korean National Police, where he was later called the Octopus Guy. Like most of the members of their group, Tamsi had no experience working with children. He has never even worked on investigating cryptocurrency crimes. But Faruqi insisted that they needed an octopus guy to get into Korea. Shortly after that, C and another agent of the US Immigration and Customs Enforcement, authorized for secret operations, flew to Washington, D.C. They rented a conference room at the hotel, and in front of Yanchev's eyes, an undercover agent went to the Welcome to Video website, paid the amount in bitcoins, and began downloading gigabytes of video. The strange choice of location, a hotel, and not a government agency, was due to the fact that it was better to hide the identity of the agent in case the video somehow could track its users, despite the protection of the Tor. And also so that when the time comes for prosecution, the D.C. Attorney's Office will be given jurisdiction. An immigration police agent used a Wi-Fi hotspot to download so as not to siphon the most dangerous content from the internet through the hotel's network. As soon as the undercover agent's work was completed, they shared the files with Yanchevsky, who, along with Lindsay Sattenberg, spent the following weeks watching the videos, cataloging any evidence they could find to identify the people involved. In addition, they saturated their minds with the horrors of child abuse that would fill their nightmares for the rest of their lives. Sattenberg's years as a prosecutor in child exploitation cases have somewhat dulled her feelings. She found that the other lawyers on the team couldn't even listen to her describe the content of the videos, let alone watch them with their own eyes. They asked me to shut up, to put it in writing, she recalls. And then they said it was even worse. Yanchevsky, as the lead agent in the case, was instructed to compile affidavits that would be used in any indictment document that they would eventually be able to present in court. This meant watching dozens of videos, searching for those that presented the most egregious materials on the site, and then compiling descriptions of them for the jury and the judge. He compares the experience to a scene from A Clockwork Orange, an endless montage from which he constantly wanted to look away, but he was not allowed to do so. In the first weeks of autumn of the 2017 year, the team investigating the Welcome to Video network began the painstaking process of tracking all possible users of the site in the blockchain and sending hundreds of legal requests to the exchange around the world to help analyze each outgrowth of the Welcome to Video Bitcoin address cluster in the reactor. They invited a Chainalysis employee named Aaron Baikin, an Armenian-American former policeman from Fresno, whom Gambarian had known since childhood and recommended to Levin. Baikin's job was to conduct what he called a cluster audit, survive all possible investigative clues from the traces of cryptocurrency on the site. This meant manually tracking payments from the previous address to the next one, until he finds the exchange where the Welcome to Video client bought his bitcoins, and identifying information that the exchange probably had. A lot of Welcome to Video users made it easier for him to work. There was excellent clustering in the reactor, says Baikin. Everything looked very clear. In some cases, he traced the payment chain through several transitions before the money arrived on the exchange. But for hundreds of users, he said, he could see wallet addresses receiving money from exchanges. and then placing funds directly into the Welcome to Video cluster. When responses from exchanges with the identification information of these users began to arrive, the team has started the process of collecting more complete profiles of their goals. They started collecting names, faces, and photos of hundreds of men. Almost all of them were men, from all walks of life and from all over the world. Their descriptions crossed borders, race, age, social status, and nationality. All these people had in common was their gender and financial connection to the worldwide hidden cache of child abuse. By this time, the team felt that they had identified the Korean site administrator with confidence. They obtained a search warrant for Song Jong-woo's Gmail accounts and many of his exchange records. And they could see that he seemed to be the only one receiving cashed-up income from the site, but not his father, who increasingly seemed like an unwitting participant, a man whose son stole his identity to create cryptocurrency accounts. In Song Jong-woo's emails, they found for the first time photos of a young man, such as selfies that he took to show friends. How he broke a tooth in a car accident. He was a thin, unremarkable young Korean, with wide-set eyes and a shock of black hair in the style of the Beatles. But as the portrait of this administrator was formed, the profiles of hundreds of other men who used the site were also formed. Some immediately attracted the attention of the investigation team. One suspected the horror of Thomas Tampsey and his colleagues from Homeland Security, was an agent of the Immigration and Customs Enforcement in Texas. The other was an assistant principal at a high school in Georgia. The school administrator posted videos on social networks in which he sings a duet in karaoke with teenage girls from his school. In any other case, the videos could be viewed as unremarkable. But considering what they knew about the sites that this person visited, agents with more experience working with children warned Yanchevsky that the videos may reflect a form of perversion. These were people who occupied a privileged position in power, with potential access to victims. The investigators immediately realized that they needed to arrest some of the users of the Velcom video as soon as possible, even before they can organize the dismantling of the site. Child exploitation experts have warned them that some offenders have systems in place to warn others if law enforcement arrests or compromises their accomplices. Code words or so-called dead man switches that sent a warning if these people were absent from their computer for a certain period of time. However, the investigation team at the time of the video felt that they had no choice but to act quickly and take a certain risk. Another suspect came to their attention around the same time, for a different reason. He lived in Washington, D.C. In fact, the man's house was across the street from the U.S. Attorney's office, not far from the metropolitan area of Gallery Place. He lived in the same apartment building, from which one of the prosecutors had recently left. They realized that this place could be useful to them. Yanchevsky and Gambarian could easily search this man's house and his computers as an experiment. If it proves that this person was Welcome's client of that video, they will be able to file charges for the entire case. In the Judicial District of Columbia, overcoming a key legal hurdle. However, digging deeper, they discovered that this man was a former congressional staffer and held a high-ranking position in a prestigious environmental organization. Will the arrest or search of the victim's home with such a profile cause a public outcry that will sink their case? However, as soon as the agents focused their attention on this suspect, they discovered that he had suspiciously strangely stopped appearing on social media. Someone from the team came up with the idea to get his travel records. They discovered that he had flown to the Philippines and was about to fly back to Washington via Detroit. This discovery led agents and prosecutors to two thoughts. First of all, the Philippines was a notorious place for sex tourism, often of the kind where children were involved. The Immigration Police Office in Manila was constantly busy with child exploitation cases. Secondly, when this person flew back to the United States, Customs and Border Protection could legally detain him and demand access to his devices to search for evidence. Strange contradictory exceptions to the constitutional protection of Americans, which in this case could serve to benefit Will their suspect from the District of Columbia raise the alarm and disrupt the investigation at the very beginning? Yes, all this could have disrupted our business, says Yanchevsky. But we had to act. At the end of October, Customs Border Control officers at the Detroit Metropolitan Airport stopped a man disembarking from a flight from the Philippines to Washington. The staff took him to the secondary inspection room. Despite his vehement protests, the border guards insisted on taking his computer and phone before allowing him to leave. A few days later, on October 25th, the prosecutor, who lived in the same D.C. apartment building as the suspect, saw an email from the management of her old house. She stayed on the mailing list even though she moved. The email said that the Panda from the garage in the alley behind the house would be closed this morning. The message explained that the unknown landed there after jumping off the balcony of his apartment. The man died. The prosecutor put two and two together. The suicide was their test suspect in the Velcom video case. Yanchevsky and Gambarian immediately went to an apartment building and confirmed it to the management. The very first subject of their investigation had just committed suicide. Later that day, two IRS agents returned to the scene of the man's death with a search warrant. They took the elevator to the 11th floor together with the manager, who was deeply puzzled as to why the tax service was involved in this case, but silently opened the door for them. A rather dirty apartment with high ceilings was waiting for them outside the door. There were also suitcases from the trip that were not yet fully unpacked. The night before, the man ordered pizza, and part of it remained uneaten on the table. Yanchevsky recalls feeling the gloomy silence of this man's empty house, imagining the desperate choice he faced last night. Looking down from the balcony 11 floors down, the agent saw a place in the alley below where the sidewalk had recently been hosed down. The Metropolitan Police of the District of Columbia offered to show agents a video from a surveillance camera, in which a man crashed to his death. They politely declined. Meanwhile, the Department of Customs and Border Protection in Detroit confirmed that they searched the computer seized from the man at the airport. Part of his memory was encrypted, and part was not. And they found videos of child rape, as well as secretly recorded adult sex videos. Their decision to target this man served their purpose. Their choice was correct. The District of Columbia Prosecutor's Office briefly suspended its work to meet and acknowledge the all-realistic shock of the man's death. Their investigation of a website hosted on the other side of the world has already led to someone committing suicide just a few blocks from their office. It was just a reminder of how serious what we were investigating was, Faruqi says. Nevertheless, the group agreed. They can't let this suicide distract them from their work. Yanchevsky says he would prefer that this man be arrested and charged. But by this point, he had already been forced to watch videos of child sexual abuse for hour after hour. He put aside his emotions at the beginning of this case, so he had little sympathy for the consumer of these materials. Next on their list was the assistant principal of the high school. Just a few days later, Yanchevsky flew to Georgia and joined a tactical group of customs police agents who were conducting a search. For the first time, he came face to face with the alleged client of the video in his own home. Despite his stoicism, the second case sank Yanchevsky more than a target in Washington. Neat, well-maintained brick two-story house. The parents were interrogated in different rooms. Children of the same age as the Yanchevsky children watched the Mickey Mouse Club. Yanchev's agents stayed in the house long enough to search it, interrogate the man, and seize his electronic device for analysis. Faruqi says that in addition to the evidence that the man paid for materials on the Welcome to Video website, he also admitted to inappropriately touching students at his school. Later, the man will be charged with sexual abuse of minors, although he never pleads guilty. At least for Yanchevsky, all the last doubts he had after his first confrontation with the suspect, based only on tracking the cryptocurrency, settled in a matter of hours. At the end of the day, I felt more confident, he says. We were right. The blockchain didn't lie. The team worked hard on their short list of high-priority goals and test examples of the well-known video. But in December 2017, they stumbled upon another clue that changed their priorities again. Tracking the financial traces of Welcome to Video, the investigators took care to record the entire contents of the site's chat page, where users still left a constant stream of comments amid spam and trolling, typical of any anonymous web forum. The site seemed to be completely unmoderated. There was no administrator's email address or support contact anywhere to be seen. But Yanchevsky began to notice repeated messages from one account that vaguely resembled support service contacts. Contact the administrators if you need help fixing the error. It included a Torbox email address based on Tor, focused on privacy. When Yanchevsky tried to decipher who was behind these messages, he checked the username before the dog sign in the Torbox address. A unique string of 6 characters to see if it matches the user well with that video. Of course, he discovered that someone with the same nickname had uploaded over 100 videos. Aeon Bay from Oxygen came up with the idea to use this Torbox email address in the database seized from BTC, and during the investigation of the crypto exchange by the tax administration. Vice found a match. One account on the BBC and was registered with an email address that contained the same unique string of 6 characters. It wasn't Torbox's email address, but the address of another privacy-oriented email service called Cygate. Yanchevsky knew that Torbox and both Darknet services would not respond to legitimate requests for information about their users. But the BTC data included the IP addresses of 10 past logins to the exchange of the same user. In 9 cases out of 10, the IP address was hidden using a VPN or Tor. But during the 10th visit to BTC, the user made a mistake. He left his real home IP address open. The trace showed that the IP address leads to a home internet connection, this time not in Korea, but in Texas. Was there a second administrator on that video, this time from the USA? Yanchevsky Bay continued to pull the strings with increasing urgency, requesting information about the user's account from their internet provider. It was Friday morning, early December. Yanchevsky was drinking coffee at his desk in the tax administration office when he received the results of the subpoena. He opened the letter to find the name and home address. He was an American in his 30s who lived in a town near San Antonio. But the position of this person, when Yanchevsky understood the sent data, struck even more. He was another employee of the Ministry of Internal Security, this time as an agent of the Border Guard Service. Yanchevsky quickly began collecting publicly available information about this agent from his social media accounts. First, he found the page of the man's wife on the social network, and then the account of the man himself, where his name was written backwards. Bice also dug up his Amazon page, where he left reviews of hundreds of products and added others to his wish list, including external storage devices that can store terabytes of video, hidden cameras and cameras designed to be inserted into small narrow holes, for example, drilled into a wall. Finally, with a creeping sense of fear, Yanchevsky found out that the wife of a border guard agent has a little daughter, and that he created a crowdfunding page on GoFundMe to raise money in order to legally adopt a girl. Damn, Yanchevsky thought. Did he upload a video of his daughter? Yanchevsky switched to a well-known video and found that some thumbnails of videos uploaded by a person with this username show sexual abuse of a little girl about the same age as the suspect's daughter. He realized that now he had a duty to isolate this border guard agent from his victim as soon as possible. For the next 10 days, Yanchevsky hardly left his workplace. He drove home, had a quick lunch with his family at their small mansion in Arlington, Virginia, and then returned to the office to work late, often calling Bice and Faruqi in the dead of night. Yanchevsky asked their undercover agent to upload videos that had been uploaded by a suspected agent from Texas, and began the grueling process of watching them one by one. In several videos, he noticed something that shook the image matching programs in his brain. At one point in the recording, the girl in the video had a red flannel shirt tied around her waist. He looked back at the photo of the girl posted on the GoFundMe page and saw her. She was wearing the same red shirt. Was this border guard agent the administrator of the Welcome to Video site? Moderator. It hardly mattered. Yanchevsky now believed he had found the identity of an active child rapist who lived with his victim, recorded his crimes, and shared them with thousands of other users. The Texan took the first place on their list of targets 2 weeks before Christmas. On the 10th day after he identified a Border Patrol agent, Yanchevsky flew to South Texas. Along with Thomas Tamsey of the Customs Police and the prosecutor of his team dealing with the issue of child exploitation, Lindsay Sattenberg, on a cool, dry evening about hundreds of miles from the Mexican border. Tamsey and a group of Texas state troopers chased a suspect as he drove home from work. They later stopped him. Together with a group of FBI agents, they took the man to a nearby hotel for questioning. Meanwhile, Yanchevsky and a group of local investigators from the Migration and Customs Police entered the man's house and began searching for evidence. The two-story house was dilapidated and dirty, Yanchevsky recalls, with the exception of the man's well-organized office on the second floor, where they found his computer. He walked down the corridor from this office to the girl's bedroom and immediately recognized it as a film set, where videos uploaded by a man were filmed. On the wall, he noticed a poster that he had seen in the recording, and for a moment, he felt as if he had fallen through the screen of his own computer into the scenery of a horror movie. The IRS agent and the prosecutor brought with them an FBI agent with experience in child exploitation cases. He took the girl away from the agents searching her house to a safer place. In the end, the girl told him in detail about the abuse she had been subjected to. Shortly after the search of the suspect's house, Yanchevsky arrived at the hotel room where other agents were interrogating the suspect. For the first time, he saw the purpose of his obsession for the next week and a half. The man was tall and sturdy. He was wearing a military uniform, and his hair was already thinning. At first, he refused to talk about any physical violence that he might have committed. But in the end, he confessed to storing, distributing, and, finally, making videos of child sexual abuse. Yanchevsky was struck by the man's dispassionate, almost clinical description of his actions. He gave investigators the password to his home computer, and the agent, who was still at his house, began extracting evidence from the computer and sending it to Yanchevsky. There were detailed spreadsheets of all the child sexual exploitation videos that the man had stored on his hard drives, and, apparently, he was filming at home. Another table from the man's computer contained a long list of accounts of other users of that video. During the interrogation, the man explained his scheme. He posed as an administrator in messages that he posted on the site's chat page, and then asked users who fell for the bait to send him their usernames and passwords, which he used to log into their accounts in order to access the videos of these users. The agent of the Border Guard Service has never been the administrator or moderator of the Welcome to Video site, but was only a particularly insidious visitor to it, ready to deceive the same perverted users in order to satisfy their own appetites. After a tense 10 days, agents identified and arrested another alleged child molester and even rescued his victim. But when Yanchevsky flew back to Washington, he knew that a much more extensive network of well-known videos remained virtually untouched. And until they close the site itself, it will continue to show its videos, including the ones that the Border Patrol agent downloaded from his home office in Texas to an anonymous crowd of consumers like him. At the beginning of January 2000 of the 18th year, the investigators of the District of Columbia received news from Thomas C. that he and his team had arrested another federal law enforcement officer who was a user of Welcome to Video. This second agent, who served in the US Customs and Immigration Police, did not seem to be related to the already arrested Border Patrol agent. However, he also lived in Texas, less than an hour's drive from the house of the man they had recently come to search. In addition to this grim coincidence, the news of the arrest of the Customs Police agent also meant that the initial list of high-priority suspects compiled by the research team was finally closed. They could move on to their main target, Sun John Woo, and the welcome to video server under his control. By February, the career-oriented part of the operation was beginning. Before the arrests in Texas, Yanchevsk, Gambarian, Faruqi and Temsi flew to Seoul to meet with the Korean National Police Agency. At a dinner hosted by the local attaché, the US Customs Police, the Korean police chief himself told the famous octopus eater Tassi that his best team would help the Americans. Soon, they took Sun John Woo under constant surveillance. They knew when he came and went from his home, located 2.5 hours south of Seoul, in South Chungcheong Province. Now, in the midst of winter on the Korean peninsula, just a week after Korea hosted the Olympic Games in Pyeongchang, American agents have arrived in Seoul again. Gambarian had to stay for an improperly organized conference, at which he was ordered to speak by the director of the agency. But the Yanchev Faruqs took with them Aron Basie and Yuli Lee, a Korean-American computer crimes prosecutor, to the team. By this point, growing international forces had also gathered around this case. The US National Crime Agency, which launched its own investigation into the Velcom 2 video case, immediately after Levin's visit to London, sent 2 agents to Seoul. The German federal police also joined the coalition. It turned out that the Germans pursued the site administrators on their own, even before they learned about the investigation of the US Tax Administration. But they never managed to enlist the support of the Korean National Police. In the first days of their stay in Seoul, the investigation team met several times at the offices of the Korean National Police to discuss their plans. Their tracking of the IP address, based on a random right-click by Gambarian, showed that the site server, oddly enough, was not in the data center of any hosting company, but in Sun John Woo's own apartment. All the evidence of mass sexual abuse of children was located right in his house. This simplified the matter. All they had to do was arrest him, disable his website, and use that evidence to convict him. The team devised a plan to grab the site administrator in his apartment early on Monday morning. However, the day before, on Friday, Yanchevsky caught a cold. He spent most of the weekend with prosecutor Yuli Lee, dazedly wandering between markets and shops in Seoul, trying to pronounce the word gasibgi, the Korean word for humidifier. On Sunday night, he took a dose of what he hoped was the Korean equivalent of NyQuil. It was then that the Korean police alerted the team that the plan had changed. Song unexpectedly went to Seoul for the weekend. Now, the team monitoring his whereabouts believed he had begun an overnight trip back to his home south of the city. If the police had managed to drive up to Sun's house that night and track him down, maybe they could have been there when he returned, ready to arrest him at the door. Thus, he would not have been able to destroy the evidence or commit suicide, which has already happened to one of the defendants in the case in Washington. That evening, Faruqi was in the lobby of the hotel. Then he and went to their rooms to go to bed. Yanchevsky, sick, half asleep due to cold medicine, and clutching a pillow from his hotel room, went out into the pouring rain and got into a car with a customs police liaison to start a long night trip to the south. The agent begged Yanchevsky to get behind the wheel of another car instead of an elderly Korean from his team, who, according to the agent, was a notoriously bad driver. But Yanchevsky insisted that he was too drugged to navigate the dark, wet roads of the country, located 11,000 kilometers from his home. A few hours later, the group arrived at the parking lot of Sun's apartment, located in a 10-story tower with several small buildings on one side and a vast deserted rural landscape on the other, to begin their long exploration in the rain. It was well after midnight when they saw Sun's car finally drive into the garage of the complex. A group of Korean agents was waiting for him there. One particularly imposing officer, whom agents called Smiley because he never smiled. He led a group of plainclothes policemen, making his way into the elevator next to Sleepy when he went inside. The agents silently took the elevator up to the floor with him and left when he came out. They arrested him as soon as he came to the front door. He offered no resistance. During the arrest and the subsequent hours-long search of Sona's apartment, Yanchevsky and other foreigners were stuck in their cars in the rain-drenched parking lot. Only the national police had the right to capture Son and enter his house. When the Korean officers handcuffed the young administrator of the video, they asked him if he would agree to allow Yanchevsky or any of the Americans to enter. The Dream, unsurprisingly, refused. Thus, Yanchevsky limited himself to a guided tour through FaceTime, through a small and unremarkable apartment that Son shared with his divorced father. Men with dirty hands with the same photo at the beginning of the investigation. Meanwhile, Korean agents searched the apartment for evidence and confiscated electronic devices. The Korean agent hosting the broadcast for Yanchevsky eventually pointed the phone camera at a desktop computer on the floor in Son's bedroom. It was a cheap system unit, one part of the body of which was removed. Hard drives were found inside the computer, which Sleep added one by one. As each disk was gradually filled with terabytes of videos of child rapes. This was the welcome to video server. I was expecting something glowing, ominous, Yanchevsky recalls. And it was just a poor computer. It was so weird. This wretched computer, having only caused chaos in the whole world, was standing on the floor of this kid. On the way back, Yanchevsky understood why this representative wanted him to get behind the wheel of another car. An elderly employee driving another car in their van was somehow so disoriented after a sleepless night that he turned the wrong way. Drove off the highway, narrowly avoiding a high-speed collision and scaring his passenger, Aaron Bice. Barely averting this disaster, when the sun started to rise and the rain stopped, the group stopped at a truck stop along the highway to have breakfast of instant ramen at a gas station. Yanchevsky, still ill, was completely exhausted and was amazed at how disappointing it all looked. His team found and pulled out both the administrator and the server that was in the epicenter of the global network that they were investigating. He had been waiting for this moment for more than 6 months. But he didn't feel elated. There were no raptures, no celebrations. The agents returned to their cars to continue the long journey back to Seoul. The next day, after finally getting enough sleep, Yanchevsky, through the anguish of last night's operation, began to realize how lucky they were. From the forensic experts who examined the computers and John Woo, he learned that Song had not encrypted his server. Everything was there. All content of the Welcome to video, its user database and wallets that processed all Bitcoin transactions. The scale of the video collection, now that they could see it in full, was staggering. More than 250,000 videos were stored on the server. It was the largest collection of materials about child sexual abuse in history. When they later shared the collection with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children (NNC), which helps catalog, identify, and delete CM materials online. The center found that 45% of the videos had never previously passed through their analysis system. The system of checking the uniqueness and encouraging the download of fresh content by Welcome to Video has fulfilled its task, opening up countless new cases of child abuse. However, the real prize for the investigators was the information about the users of the site. The Korean National Police provided the American team with a copy of the Welcome to Video databases, and they started working in the building of the US Embassy in Seoul, reconstructing these data collections on their server. Meanwhile, in order not to warn users of the site about the deletion, they quickly created a similar homepage of the video on their own server, using a private key obtained from a real server, and duplicated its address in the Darknet. When users visited the site, now it displayed only a message that it was under development and would be back soon with updates. The inscriptions were intentionally accompanied by typos inherent in his former Korean administrator. Bice spent 2 days without looking up, recovering user data from the site in a form that they could easily request. And Yanchev's Farouks were standing behind him, pestering him with questions about whether the system was ready. When Bice finished, the US team had a full catalog of the site's usernames. Now they could link each Bitcoin payment that they had originally scheduled in the blockchain with these usernames, and see exactly which video each of these users uploaded or downloaded. By the time Americans were ready to return home at the end of February, they had integrated the de-anonymized identities from their subpoenas when exchanging cryptocurrencies into a searchable database. It featured the entire Velcom network, videos with real user names, photos. And for those who paid on the site, reports on these payments, and accurate videos of child abuse to which these customers bought access. You could see the whole picture, says Yanchevsky. It was like a dictionary, thesaurus, and Wikipedia combined. In front of them was built a fully disclosed structure of the global network of child exploitation Velcom that video. Hundreds of carefully detailed profiles of consumers, collectors, shareholders, manufacturers, and direct abusers. Now it's time for the final phase of this unprecedented case. Over the following weeks, Thomas Thamsey's team in Colorado began sending out their dossiers to a well-known video agent of SHE, local police, and a foreign police agency around the world. These targeted packages included descriptions of the suspects, reports on their transactions, any other evidence they gathered about them. And considering that some law enforcement agents have never participated in investigations related to cryptocurrency, brief instructions on how Bitcoin and its blockchain work. There will be no coordinated global destruction. There will be no attempts to cause shock and awe by simultaneous arrests. The defendants in the case were too dispersed and international for such a synchronized operation. Instead, searches, arrests, and interrogations began to be conducted all over the world, primarily of those people who could be active rapists. Then there were those who uploaded the videos, and at the end those who downloaded them. Gradually, as the users of the Velcom video were arrested, the team of investigators began to receive feedback on the results of their work, with painful, sometimes hopeful, often tragic consequences. An IT worker from Kansas, whose arrest was a priority, when they discovered that his wife was running an idiotic kindergarten for babies and toddlers, deleted all his videos of child rapes from his computer before the agents arrived. Prosecutors say he later confessed when the leftover files in the computer's storage matched their recordings from the Welcome video server. When agents came for a 20-year-old man in New York, his father blocked the door of their apartment, at first thinking it was a break-in. But when the agents explained why the warrant was issued, the man let them in. The son, as it turned out later, raped the daughter of a family friend and, according to prosecutors, secretly recorded another girl through her webcam. A criminal from Washington, D.C., was trying to commit suicide when the H-team entered his house. He hid in his bathroom and cut his throat. One of the agents who made the arrest had the training of an army medic. He managed to stop the bleeding and save the man's life. Later, they found 450,000 hours of child abuse videos on his computers, including videos of a Texas girl uploaded by a Border Patrol agent who appeared at the beginning of the investigation. As the months passed, the stories continued to accumulate. One of the perpetrators was an elderly man in his 70s who uploaded more than 80 videos of child abuse. A man in his 20s with a traumatic brain injury, whose treatment increased his sexual appetites and weakened impulse control, and who was believed to have the same level of cognitive development as teenagers, liked to watch such videos. The messages of another man from New Jersey contained data about his negotiations about buying a child for his own use. Thomas Thamsey, as the lead agent of H, and on this case, coordinated more arrests in the Welcome video case than anyone else for more than 50, and was present at so many of them that they turned into a blur in which only the sharpest moments remained stuck in his memory. He found one almost naked suspect in the basement. Another suspect told him that he was associated with the Boy Scouts and that he was always attracted to children. The reactions of family members and friends of criminals were also interesting, who until the last believed that their relative or acquaintance was not capable of such a thing, and then changed dramatically in the face after providing irrefutable evidence of guilt. Crimes have covered the entire globe, extending far beyond the borders of the United States. Dozens of users of the Welcome video were arrested in the Czech Republic, Spain, Brazil, Ireland, France, and Canada. In England, where the whole case began with a demonstration to leaven, the country's National Crime Agency arrested a 26-year-old man who allegedly raped 2 children, one of whom they found naked on a bed in his house. This man uploaded more than 6,000 files to the site. In another case, it was discovered that the Hungarian ambassador to Peru, who uploaded the content with a well-made video. More than 19,000 images were stored on the computer. He was quietly removed from his post in South America, taken to Hungary and charged. He pleaded guilty. For the team of investigators, many international cases have fallen into a kind of black hole. One Welcome to Video user from Saudi Arabia returned to his country and was detained by law enforcement agencies of that country. Faruqi and Yanchevsky say they have never heard what happened to this man. It has been left to Saudi Arabia's own justice system, which sentences some sex offenders to Sharia-based punishments of flogging or even beheading. When agents searched the car of a Chinese citizen living near Seattle and working for Amazon, they found a teddy bear along with a map of playgrounds in the area, despite the fact that the man had no children of his own. Subsequently, the man fled to China and, as far as the prosecutor's office knows, was never found. In each of the hundreds of packages sent out by the team, Chris Yanchevsky's contact was listed as a phone number that could be called with any questions. Yanchevsky found himself explaining the blockchain and its central role in the case over and over again to NSA agent and local police officers in the United States and around the world, many of whom had never even heard of Bitcoin or the Darknet. In total, Yanchevsky visited 6 countries and talked to more than 50 different people to help them figure it out, often several times each, including one American prosecutor and a team of agents with whom he had more than 20 conversations. Weiss, who led the recovery of server data, says he talked to even more agents and officers. According to his calculations, there were more than 100 of them. Ultimately, since the beginning of the case, and for a year and a half following the confiscation of the server, law enforcement agencies around the world have arrested at least 337 people for involvement in the case of the Welcome video. They also removed 23 children from sexual exploitation networks. These 337 arrests still represent only a small fraction of the total number of registered users of Welcome to Video. When a group from the US examined their copy of data from a server in Korea, they found thousands of accounts on the site, but the vast majority of them have never transferred bitcoins to the site's wallets. Without money, the investigators' trail was usually lost. In other words, if it weren't for the cryptocurrency and the years-long trap set because of its supposed inability to track transactions, most of the 337 pedophiles arrested in the Welcome to Video case and their rescued victims would probably never have been discovered. The Rs and the U.S. Attorney's Office in the District of Columbia took an unprecedented approach, treating the case of mass sexual abuse of children as a financial investigation, and it was crowned with success. Among all their detective work, it was the Bitcoin blockchain that served as their true guiding star, leading them through this momentous case. Faruqi claims that without crypto tracking, they would never have been able to map and identify so many users of the site. It was the only way through that darkness, he says. The darker the darknet gets, the more obvious the money trail becomes. However, the transfer of money laundering researchers to the very depths of the CM internet cesspool had its consequences. Almost every member of the team had their own children, and almost all of them say that as a result of their work, they began to try much more to protect these children. Sometimes it reached such an extent that their trust in some members of their own families was significantly undermined. Yanchevsky, who after this incident moved from the District of Columbia to Grand Rapids, Michigan. Now he does not allow his children to ride bicycles to school on their own, as he liked to do himself as a child. Even seemingly innocent things. For example, another friendly parent who offers to watch his children while visiting the pool now triggers red alarms in his awareness. Yuli Lee, another investigator in the case, says she does not allow her children to go to public toilets unaccompanied. She also won't let them play at a friend's house if his parents haven't passed the appropriate check. Faruqi says that about 15 videos that he watched as part of the investigation irreparably burned out his brain, and forever sharpened his sense of the danger that the world poses to his children. According to him, he and his wife began to swear more often because of his tendency to excessive guardianship. Gambaryan's wife Yuki says that the video was the only time when her harsh husband, who was born in the USSR, discussed the case with her and admitted that it hurt him, that he emotionally struggled with it. Gambaryan says that, in particular, he is still haunted by the fact that the widest strata of society took part in the abuse on the site. I have seen that everyone is capable of this. Doctors, directors, law enforcement officers. Call it whatever you want. Evil or whatever. It is in everyone. Or almost everyone. In early July 2020 year, John Woo came out of Seoul prison in a black t-shirt with long sleeves and a green plastic bag with his belongings. Because of Korea's lenient laws on child sexual abuse, he spent only 18 months behind bars. U.S. prosecutors, including Faruqi, argued that he should be extradited to the United States to face charges under the American justice system. But Korea rejected the request. Since the 2020 year, the creator and administrator of the Welcome to Video, by the standards of the Korean Criminal Code, has completely redeemed himself and is now absolutely clean before the law. The team of investigators from the District of Columbia, which worked on the case of Welcome to Video, is still deeply dissatisfied with the mysteriously lenient sentence of Sun's establishment of the largest website in history, with materials about child sexual abuse. But Yanchevsky says he is comforted by the outrage of Korean society over the case. The country's social media exploded with anger over Sun's quick release. More than 400,000 people signed a petition so that the judge in the case could not apply for a seat in the Supreme Court of the country. A Korean lawmaker has put forward a bill allowing appeals against extradition decisions, and the National Assembly of the country has introduced a new law that toughens the punishment for sexual violence on the internet and downloading materials about sexual abuse of children. Meanwhile, in the US, the ripple effects of this case continued for years. Yanchevsky, Weiss, and Sattenberg say that they are still being called by law enforcement officials on the leads they have collected. On the computer of the first suspect from the District of Columbia, a former congressional staffer who committed suicide, investigators found evidence located on the cryptocurrency exchange account that the suspect also paid another source of sexual materials on the Darknet. They tracked these payments on the Dark Scandals website, which turned out to be a smaller but no less disturbing repository of sexual abuse records on the Darknet. Yanchevsky, Gambaryan, and the same group of prosecutors conducted the case of the Darks, in parallel with the completion of the investigation by Welcome to Video. In the same way, blockchain tracking made it possible to track payments on the site. With the help of the Dutch National Police, they arrested the alleged site administrator in the Netherlands, a man named Michael Rahim Mohammed, who worked under the nickname Mr. Dark. He has been charged with criminal charges in the United States, and his case continues. From the point of view of the agents and prosecutors who worked on the Welcome to Video case, the most interesting of the side effects of this case is connected with the fate of the She Customs Police agent, whom they arrested in Texas shortly before their trip to Korea. The Texan took a rare approach to his legal defense. He pleaded guilty to possession of child sexual abuse materials, but also appealed his sentence. He argued that his case should be dismissed because the agents of the Rs of the tax administration established his identity by tracking his payments in bitcoins, without a warrant, which he claimed violated his Fourth Amendment right to privacy and indirectly constituted an illegal search. The panel of judges of the appellate instance considered the argument and rejected it. In conclusion, they explained their decision on 9 pages, creating a precedent that clearly showed how far from the concepts of privacy they consider a Bitcoin transaction. Each Bitcoin user has access to the public Bitcoin blockchain and can see each Bitcoin address and the corresponding transfers. Thanks to this publicity, it is possible to determine the identity of the owners of Bitcoin addresses by analyzing the blockchain. The resolution says, there is no intrusion into a constitutionally protected area, because there is no constitutional interest in the information in the blockchain. Only a warrant is required for a search. If this search affects an area in which the accused has reasonable expectations of confidentiality. The judge's ruling argued that such expectations should not have existed here. The Xi agent was not caught while on the Welcome site. Then R's agents would have violated his privacy. He was caught because he mistakenly believed that his Bitcoin transaction history was secure. Chris Yanchevsky says that he did not fully realize the consequences of the Welcome to video case until October 2019. When it was finally announced publicly, and a notice of closure was posted on the main page of the site. That morning, Yanchevsky unexpectedly received a call from the Rs commissioner, Charles Ertic himself. Reddick told Yanchevsky that this case was the Al Capone case of our days, which was perhaps the best compliment that could be paid. In the Criminal Investigation Department of the U.S. Internal Revenue Service, where the story of Capone's arrest for tax evasion has an almost mythical status. On the same day, the Ministry of Justice held a press conference to announce the results of the investigation. U.S. Attorney Jesse Liu spoke to a crowd of reporters about what the case was like. How money surveillance allowed agents to defeat one of the worst forms of evil imaginable. Jonathan Levine from Chainalysis was present in the audience. After that, a PC employee named Greg Monahan, who supervised Gambarian and Yanchevsky, came over to thank Levin for his role in the case. In the end, it all started with Levin's tip-off to 2 board Rs agents at Bangkok airport. Monahan told Levin that this was the most important investigation of his career, that now he can retire, being sure that he worked on something really worthwhile. Levin shook hands with the head of the Criminal Investigation Department of the Tax Administration. At that time, neither he nor Monahan could have known about the cases that they had yet to solve. That the O and Chainalysis together will continue to hinder the actions of North Korean hackers, terrorist financing companies, and 2 of the world's largest Bitcoin laundering services. Or that they will track down about 70,000 Bitcoins stolen from the Croa forces, and another 120,000 stolen from the Bitfinex exchange, totaling more than $7.5 billion at today's exchange rate, which is the largest financial confiscation, cryptocurrency or otherwise, in the history of the Department of Justice. But, responding to the Monahan, Levin again thought about the abundance of blockchain evidence, about countless cases that still need to be solved, about millions of cryptocurrency transactions that cannot be hidden in any way, and about the golden age of criminal expertise, which he gave to any investigator who is ready to get a criminal out of the ground. There is still so much to do, Levin said. We're just getting started.